I smiled when I saw the notification pop up on my phone. A little envelope icon, a message from my solicitor. I almost didn't open it right away. I was standing in my kitchen in Tauranga, still in my dressing gown, waiting for the jug to boil, watching the harbor through the window, the way I do every morning. 63 years old, retired, and the biggest decision of my day was supposed to be whether I'd walk the esplanade before or after breakfast. I opened the message. Everything is in place. The transfer completed at midnight. She won't find a single cent. I put the phone face down on the bench, poured my tea, and looked out at the water for a long time. My name is not important. What matters is that I am a father. And for a long time, I was a very foolish one. My daughter, I'll call her by her role. Because that's how I knew her. That's who she was. To me, came back into my life properly about 2 years after her mother died. My wife, Patricia, passed in the winter of 2021. Stroke. Quick, the doctor said, as if that was supposed to be a kindness. She was 59. We'd been married 31 years. I won't go into what those months after looked like. If you've lost someone who was the center of your life, you already know. If you haven't, I hope you never do. I'll just say that I was not myself. I was a version of myself with all the important parts removed. I went through the motions. I ate. I answered emails. I nodded when neighbors spoke to me, but I wasn't really there. The lights were on. Nobody home. My daughter, she was 34 at the time, lived up in Auckland. We'd had a complicated relationship for years. She and Patricia had their arguments, and somehow I always ended up caught in the middle, which usually meant I said nothing and displeased everyone equally. When Patricia died, my daughter drove down for the funeral, stayed 4 days, and left. We texted occasionally. Birthday messages, mostly. Then, about 8 months after Patricia passed, she started calling more. Weekly at first, then 2 or 3 times a week. She'd ring in the evenings, and we'd talk for an hour. She asked how I was sleeping, whether I was eating properly, whether I'd thought about getting a dog. She seemed genuinely concerned. I was touched. Grief had softened me, I suppose. Or maybe it had just made me desperate for connection, the way it does. She started coming down to Tauranga on weekends. She'd cook Sunday roasts and we'd watch whatever was on telly, and it felt, for the first time in years, like having family nearby. I told myself this was what grief did. It brought people together. It cleared away the old frictions and left something real underneath. I should have asked myself why. After years of distance, the change was so sudden and so complete. I should have asked a lot of things. My wife had been the one who managed our finances. Not because I didn't understand money. I'd spent 27 years as a quantity surveyor. I understood numbers perfectly well, but because Patricia enjoyed it. She had a system. Spreadsheets, folders, color-coded, everything organized. When she died, I inherited a filing cabinet full of documents I hadn't looked at in years and no desire whatsoever to open any of them. My daughter offered to help. That was how she framed it. "Dad, you shouldn't have to deal with all this on your own. Let me help you sort through everything." I said yes. Over the course of several months, she got across all of it. The mortgage, which was nearly paid off. The savings accounts, we had 3. 1 joint, 2 in my name alone. The term deposits Patricia had set up. The shares in a small forestry trust that Patricia's father had left her years ago, which I'd honestly forgotten existed. My Kiwi saver. Everything. She printed summaries. She made notes. She sat at my kitchen table with her laptop and asked careful questions, and I answered them all, relieved that someone was taking charge, relieved that I didn't have to think about it. She also asked me to update my online banking password. The old one was Patricia's birthday. She'd set it up years ago, and I'd never changed it. My daughter said it was a security risk, which was true. She helped me set a new one. She stood right next to me while I typed it. I remember she looked away, and I thought, how considerate. She wasn't looking away. She was memorizing the keystrokes. I know that now. I didn't know it then. The wedding came up in early 2023. She told me she was engaged to a man I'd met exactly twice, a personal trainer from Ponsonby named Blake. He was perfectly pleasant. Both times I met him. Good-looking, easygoing, the sort of man who calls everyone mate and means it warmly. I had no objection to him. I had no strong feeling about him at all, honestly, which maybe should have told me something. She said they wanted to get married that December. A summer wedding down in Queenstown. She had a venue in mind, a high country station near Arrowtown. The kind of place with stone walls and mountain views and prices that made me blink when I looked them up later. She showed me photos on her phone. It was genuinely beautiful. She said the wedding would cost around $85,000. I nearly choked on my biscuit. I said that seemed like an enormous amount of money for a single day. She said, "That's what weddings cost now, Dad," and gave me a look that suggested I was hopelessly out of touch. I said I'd contribute what I could. I said something in the range of 10,000, maybe 15. I thought that was generous. I thought that was the conversation done. It was not the conversation done. What happened next took place over about 4 months, and I only pieced it together fully much later, when my solicitor and a forensic accountant sat across from me and walked me through it like a post-mortem. My daughter had my banking passwords. She had a thorough knowledge of all my accounts. She had, at some point, obtained a printout of my mortgage documents. She'd asked for them when she was helping me organize, and had noted that the property was in my sole name and that the mortgage was 94% paid off. She also knew that I had a mild heart condition diagnosed in late 2022, which my cardiologist had described as manageable, but which had frightened me considerably. She knew I took a beta blocker every morning and that I had a follow-up appointment every 6 months. She knew this because I'd told her, gratefully, during one of those phone calls when she seemed so caring and present. In September 2023, using my online banking credentials, she transferred $53,000 out of my accounts. Not all at once, she was careful about that. Small movements, 4 or 5,000 at a time, spread over 6 weeks, all going to an account I didn't recognize, which turned out to belong to Blake's business. The wedding fund. She'd presumably called it in her own mind, her own private arrangement. In October 2023, she listed my house. I want you to sit with that for a moment. My house. The home Patricia and I had bought in 1997. The place we'd painted and repainted and argued about the kitchen renovation and planted the lemon tree that still fruits every year in the back garden. She listed it with a property agency in Tauranga, presenting herself as my authorized agent, using a power of attorney document. I did not give her a power of attorney. What I did do, 8 months earlier when she was helping me sort through things, was sign a document she put in front of me while I was exhausted and grieving and not paying proper attention. She'd said it was a resubscription form for my house insurance. I'd signed it without reading it closely. It was not a resubscription form. I don't expect sympathy for that. I was a quantity surveyor. I knew better than anyone that you read before you sign. I have no excuse except that I trusted her because she was my daughter, because Patricia had just died, because I was so far inside my own grief that I'd stopped functioning as a sensible person. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth. The property sold in November 2023. Settled unconditionally. $420,000, which in the Tauranga market at that time was actually on the lower end. She'd priced it to move quickly. The funds went into a conveyancing trust account that she had established in a name close enough to a legitimate law firm's to pass a cursory glance. By the time settlement was complete, the money had been redirected 3 times, and most of it had landed in a joint account she held with Blake. By the end of November 2023, she had taken just over $470,000 of my money and my only significant asset. I found out in the first week of December, not because I was clever, not because I'd been watching. I found out because my neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Merv who walked his spaniel past my house every morning, knocked on my door and asked if I was moving. He'd seen a sold sticker go up on a sign at the front of my house. A sign that had apparently been there for 6 weeks. I told him I wasn't moving. He looked at me with an expression I will never forget, part confusion, part pity, and said, "Mate, your house is sold." I went inside and called my bank. The conversation with the bank lasted almost 2 hours. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where she'd sat with her laptop and her helpful questions, and I listened to a young man named Josh read me a transaction history that felt like someone else's life. $53,000. Gone in fragments. The account it had gone to. The dates. I didn't say much. I don't think I could have. After I hung up, I sat there for a long time. The jug boiled and I didn't make tea. The light changed in the room as the afternoon went on. I thought about Patricia. Not her death, but her life. The way she used to hum while she folded washing. The way she'd always known, somehow, who could be trusted and who couldn't. She hadn't trusted our daughter with money. She'd never said it directly, but she'd never told her anything specific about the accounts either. I hadn't understood why at the time. I understood now, and then I felt something shift inside me that I can only describe as clarity. Not anger. Anger came later. First, there was just a kind of cold, precise focus. I was a quantity surveyor for 27 years. My job was to look at a problem, understand its exact dimensions, and work out what it would cost and how to fix it. I had not lost that ability. I had only mislaid it for a while. I picked up the phone and called my solicitor. What I hadn't told my daughter, what I hadn't told anyone, was that I had seen a different solicitor 9 months earlier. In March 2023, I'd been going through some of Patricia's old files and found a letter she'd written to herself and sealed in an envelope labeled, "For Warren, my middle name," the name she called me at home. Inside was a single handwritten page. She said she was worried about our daughter. She said she'd seen behavior over the years that concerned her, small deceptions, a habit of taking more than was offered and then finding reasons why it was justified, a particular expression our daughter wore when she thought no one was watching. Patricia said she hoped she was wrong. She said that if I was reading this, she probably hadn't been. She said, "If anything happens to me, please see a proper solicitor before you discuss the finances with anyone. Promise me that, Warren." I had cried for a very long time after reading that. Then I had made an appointment. My solicitor at the time was a careful, methodical woman who practiced in Tauranga and who had acted for Patricia and me on our original house purchase back in '97. I told her what Patricia had written. I told her I didn't know whether I was being paranoid. She said paranoia and prudence look very similar from the outside, and that we should plan for the worst and hope to be proven wrong. We spent 3 sessions establishing a structure. The joint account was closed and replaced. The term deposits were moved. The shares in the forestry trust were transferred into a family trust with a corporate trustee. My KiwiSaver beneficiary was updated. A new will, and my solicitor arranged for the property title to be notated with a caveat that would prevent any transfer or listing without written consent from both her office and me personally, delivered in person with photo ID. The caveat on the title was the thing my daughter hadn't known about. She'd listed the house. It had sold. The settlement had proceeded, and then the bank had attempted to process the transfer and hit the caveat like a wall. The funds had been frozen, pending a legal review. Blake's joint account, where the money had been redirected, had also been frozen once my solicitor began the process of tracing the transactions. My daughter didn't know any of this was happening. She thought by December she'd be sitting on nearly $500,000 and planning a Queenstown wedding. She was not. She called me on the 9th of December. I remember the date because it was 3 days before what would have been Patricia's 62nd birthday. I saw her name on my screen, and I answered, because I wanted to hear what she'd say. She said she was calling to check in. How was I doing? Was I keeping warm? She'd been thinking about coming down before Christmas. I said that would be nice. She said, actually, Dad, there was something she wanted to talk to me about. She said she and Blake had been working on some financial planning, and they'd encountered a problem with one of her accounts being temporarily inaccessible, and she was wondering if I could lend her some money to bridge the gap until it was sorted. Just temporarily, just to make sure the venue deposit didn't lapse. She said she needed about $30,000. I said I'd have to look at what I had available. She said to take my time. I said I would. I hung up and called the police. What followed was not quick. These things never are. And I want to be honest about that. The investigation was handled by the Serious Fraud Office, who became involved after my solicitor made the initial report. There were months of document gathering, account tracing, interviews. My daughter was interviewed in Auckland in February 2024. Blake was interviewed separately. He had known, it emerged, that the money coming into their joint account was from the sale of my house. He had not known it was done without my consent. I believe that. Actually, he didn't seem like a man with the organizational capacity to plan something this elaborate. He seemed, when I met him briefly during the legal process, like a man who'd ask no questions because the answers were comfortable. My daughter, faced with the documentation, did not deny what she'd done. What she did instead was explain it. She said she'd watched me deteriorate after Patricia died, and she'd been terrified. She said she'd felt like I was going to give everything away, make bad decisions, lose the house anyway through neglect. She said she'd been trying to protect me by taking control, securing the assets somewhere safe, and that she'd always intended to give it back once the wedding was done and they'd settled somewhere stable. She said she'd never meant to hurt me. She said she'd only done it because she loved me. I've thought about that a great deal. I've turned it over many times, late at night. The way you do with things that don't resolve cleanly. And what I've come to is this. I believe she believed it. That's not the same as it being true. That's not the same as it being anywhere close to acceptable. People who cause serious harm to the people they claim to love have usually constructed a story in which the harm is actually kindness. The story being sincere doesn't make it anything other than what it is. She was charged with obtaining by deception, forgery of a legal document, and misuse of a power of attorney. She pleaded guilty in the second quarter of 2024. She was sentenced to community detention and a substantial reparation order. The frozen funds were returned to me, all but a portion that had already been spent on a venue deposit, a wedding dress, and a catering company, none of which were recoverable. The wedding did not take place. Blake ended the engagement in January 2024, 2 weeks after the accounts were frozen. I don't blame him for that either. I have not spoken to my daughter since the sentencing. That is not a permanent decision. It is simply where I am right now. The door is not locked, but I am not the one who closed it. What I've been asked, by more than one person, is how I feel. Whether I feel vindicated, whether I feel sad, whether I feel like I won. I feel like a man who lost his wife, and then came very close to losing everything she and I built together, and who is sitting in a house that is still his, in a city he loves, looking out at the harbor in the morning. That's what I feel. Something between relief and exhaustion. Not victory, not ruin. Just still here. I want to say a few things plainly. For anyone reading this who might be in a similar position or who might be worried they could be. The first thing is, grief makes you vulnerable in ways that are hard to see from inside. It isn't weakness. It isn't stupidity. It is a temporary restructuring of your entire self. And during that restructuring, people you trust have unusual access to you. That access can be misused. It was misused with me. It can happen to anyone, at any level of intelligence or professional experience. The second thing is, any document someone puts in front of you, regardless of who they are or what they say it is, deserves to be read fully before you sign it. Every time. No exceptions. I knew this. I failed to do it. The cost of that failure was nearly everything. The third thing is, get your affairs properly organized before you need to. Not when you're in crisis. Not when someone is sitting at your kitchen table being helpful. Before. A good solicitor, a properly structured will, a caveat on your property title if you own your home, these are not dramatic measures. They are ordinary prudence. Patricia understood that. Her letter, which she wrote quietly and put away and hoped I'd never need, is the reason I still have my home. The fourth thing, and the hardest. Love is not proof of trustworthiness. It has never been proof of trustworthiness. You can love someone completely and still need to protect yourself from them. You can be someone's father and still need to verify what they tell you. The two things are not in contradiction. Boundaries and love are not opposites. The absence of boundaries is not love. Sometimes it is just a gap in the fence, waiting for someone to walk through it. I still make tea in the morning. I still watch the harbor. The lemon tree in the back garden fruited well this year, better than it has in years actually, which I choose to take as a small good sign, the way you do when you're 63 and the world has become a place where small good signs matter. Patricia's photo is on the bench beside the jug. She is laughing in it. Some family Christmas years ago, squinting slightly in the sun. She knew people. She could read them in a way I never quite could. She knew. And she wrote it down. And she sealed it in an envelope and trusted me to find it. I found it just in time. I don't take that lightly. Not for a single morning. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened. Not in any mystical sense, just the plain, ordinary logic of it. Every action lands somewhere. Every choice costs something. My daughter made a long series of choices, each one building on the last, and the weight of them eventually came down entirely on her. That's not justice delivered from above. That's just how things work when you follow the chain back to its beginning. But I've also had to look at my own part in it honestly, because the chain had more than one link I'd put there myself. I stopped reading documents. I stopped asking questions. I let grief hollow me out to the point where I handed over the keys, not literally, not at first, but in every way that mattered. I stopped being a participant in my own life and became for a while just a passenger. And passengers don't notice when the route changes. The tricky thing about trust is that it feels like virtue. It feels like you're being generous, open-hearted, a good father. What I've learned is that trust without verification isn't generosity. It's abdication. Real love, the kind that actually protects the people you care about and yourself, requires you to stay awake. Patricia knew that. She demonstrated it quietly her entire life. And she left me one final demonstration in a sealed envelope that I almost didn't find in time. Resilience, I've decided, isn't the dramatic thing people make it out to be. It isn't standing up and declaring that you won't be beaten. It's quieter than that. It's making the phone call when you'd rather sit in the dark. It's walking into a solicitor's office when you're still raw with grief and saying, I need help setting things up properly. It's getting through one morning, and then the next, until the mornings start to feel like yours again, rather than like something happening to you. My daughter was intelligent. She was organized, meticulous, patient. She planned across months. All of that intelligence, all of that capability, directed at taking from someone who loved her. And the outcome was exactly what you'd expect when you build something on a foundation of deception. It collapsed under its own weight before it was ever finished. The accounts were frozen. The wedding never happened. The engagement ended. She stood in a courtroom and heard herself described accurately as a person who had forged documents and stolen from her father. I don't tell this story to condemn her. I tell it because I think a lot of people are sitting somewhere right now, grieving or exhausted or simply trusting because it's easier than asking hard questions. And they deserve to hear that the asking matters. That staying sharp, staying present, staying engaged with your own affairs, that's not paranoia. That's self-respect. That's the most basic form of looking after yourself. Patricia understood that. She tried to tell me, and she did tell me in the end. I just had to be ready to hear it. I'm still here. The lemon tree is fruiting. That's enough for now.